Marie made it through the square garden plots and almost to the stables before Elise caught her arm. Puffing and panting, she pulled Marie to a stop and held her hand firmly, her chest heaving as she tried to catch her breath. "What is your problem?" Elise huffed when she could speak again. "You can't leave." Her pale, freckled features were bleached in the moonlight. Marie glared at her. "Yes, I can." She pulled her hand away. Elise drew her petite self up to her full height and squared her shoulders. It was a posture Marie had often seen her take when she was cross with Nick. "What did you do?" "Nothing." Marie turned away. She was almost at the gate that led to the street. "Yes, you did something." Elise caught her hand again. Though tiny, her grip was enough to prevent Marie from leaving. "You confronted him, didn't you?" Her voice was growing louder with panic. "He'll kill you. You know that, right? Why? Why are you so stubborn?" Marie glanced nervously at the house behind them. The music and laughter was enough to cover the argument, but if anyone noticed them, her situation was going to become dangerous. "Shut up, or they'll hear you." With a tremendous effort, Marie yanked her arm free and headed toward the street. "You can't do this," Elise hissed, following as closely as she could. A few goats in a nearby pen poked their heads between the wooden slats. "Where will you go? What will you do? You can't just abandon your life because Jacques has mistresses." "Mistresses?" Marie spun around. "There's more than just Laure?" Elise bit her lip, looking furious with herself. "And everyone knows," Marie muttered to herself. An ugly look crossed her face. "I'm not marrying him when the entire city knows about his extramarital affairs." She turned and walked out of the garden, letting the gate stay open behind her. Elise hitched up her skirts and followed, trying to keep up. "He's not coming back, you know. He's gone. Just accept that." Marie froze and turned, an odd expression on her face. "Don't you think I know that?" Elise fumbled for an answer. "I didn't mean that. It's just... You... Stop holding out for a happy ending. It's not coming. He's gone. Don't run away from a good life because you wish it was something else." "That's not what this is about," Marie cried, panic and exasperation rising in her chest. "I know he's gone for good, but getting back to the point, would you like a life like this? A husband like Jacques? All of society laughing at you because they think you're too stupid to know what's going on? Just leave me alone." Close to tears, she ran as fast as she could into the night. She kept going, farther and farther into the solitude of the darkness. The streets were unlit, but the glow of the moon illuminated the dirt streets ahead of her. Fog was creeping up from the harbor, swirling around her ankles. She was consumed with thoughts of the argument. Anger and frustration at Lady Isabel, Claude, Jacques, and herself overwhelmed her. She stormed through the streets, rage blinding her vision, not watching where she was going, blood pounding in her ears. A small knot of men were standing just ahead of her. They were laughing uproariously, but she didn't think much of them. There were plenty of taverns and inns around, and most soldiers and sailors spent their free time with a bottle. She was too concerned with who might soon be following her to think about what might be lying ahead. Despite the military patrols, the streets were empty except for the men. Shadows fell in strips on the unpaved road as the moon was blocked by the buildings. The men were standing by an alleyway created by the surrounding structures. Marie glanced behind her nervously. The road was empty. Suddenly they were all around her. Breaking fully from her thoughts for the first time since she'd left the ball, she found herself surrounded, the men larger and older than she'd first guessed. She tried to step around the group, but her arm was then abruptly twisted behind her back. One of the men bent down and leered at her, showing gums with many missing teeth. "Well, hello there," he laughed. Marie turned away from the fumes of raw spirits coming from his mouth. "Help!" Marie shrieked. A closed fist smashed into her stomach and her arm was twisted further up her back. She gasped in pain. The men guffawed around her. A hand pinched her. She lashed out to kick the offender but fell sideways unbalanced. She screamed again as her arm was wrenched in its socket. She thought it would break from the force of her captor's grip, and her sides burned from the bones of her stays, which were still jabbing into her. A dirty hand clamped itself against her mouth, making it difficult to breathe. The louts were pulling her into the alley. Eyes wide with panic, she looked desperately around for some form of assistance. She saw a shadow advancing from a nearby street. Friend or foe, she didn't care. It was worth the risk. She stomped her heel down on the foot of the man holding her. He jerked her arm upward, but his grip on her mouth loosened. She bit the hand, tasting blood and grime, and screamed at the top of her lungs. The dark shadow yelled something indistinguishable and ran to meet her captors with fists raised. The man holding her swore and let go. Marie stumbled to the dirt, her arm throbbing painfully, then clambered as fast as she could from her attacker. Her assailant was walking towards her, large hands clenched. She could see blood dripping down his hand, minute circles of blood sinking into the sandy ground. She continued to scramble backward, and as he advanced, she noticed a glint of gold in his ear. Pirate. A shout for assistance came from the pile of writhing limbs behind him. Glancing behind her adversary, she saw both of his companions were entangled with her champion. With a roar of frustration, the pirate aimed to kick at her, missed, and launched himself into the fray. Marie knew she should run, but something kept her rooted to the spot.